I'm Hillary Raimo, your host right here on Achieve. Why aren't more people in a sacred, holy, respectful, balanced relationship with their primary partners? What exactly could be holding this energetic blueprint from being a majority energy on this planet? If Jesus and Magdalene were alive today, would their relationship be able to flourish as it did in biblical times? Why do some seem to claim that they find their twin flame and then have that connection end or be tragically destroyed? Could it be that a species humans are unable to see in their sight spectrum are to blame? How much is us and how much may be something else? Tonight, my special guest, Eve Lorgen, suggests this is exactly what is at work and says she can prove it. Tonight, Eve shares her knowledge. So take a seat, everybody. It's going to be an interesting show, to say the least. And we are live, so if you would like to call in or you have questions or you have some kind of similar experiences, you might want to call in and talk to us and see what Eve has to say. Perhaps you are having the same kind of issues we'll be discussing tonight. Her bio and her website, evelorgen.com, Lorgen. She has some books available. She has some counseling sessions, and there's some wonderful information on her website, so feel free to check it out as we're talking tonight. I'm very excited to talk to her. I have had my own experiences in this particular topic, and so I'm curious, too. So welcome, Eve. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
So what are we dealing with exactly? I mean, we're going to skip to a topic that perhaps some people have not heard so much, and you've written some books. Why don't you tell everybody, how you got into this, where they can find you, what you do, what your books have been about. It's a good place to introduce you to my listeners.
Okay. I'll start from the beginning because I don't want to blow too many people away with too much strange stuff because this can be quite unsettling to some people who haven't really heard of such things, and they may think it's crazy. So really, I didn't really discover this aspect of what I call a relationship interference in a paranormal and supernatural way really until I investigated what I call the alien abduction experience and all the things that kind of surround that kind of experience. So really my initial career actually was I was a biochemist, and I studied Oriental medicine, decided to get a degree in counseling psychology, changed careers, and I actually had a special interest in paranormal, metaphysical things, and also the UFO phenomena as well as abductions. So I started to learn more about that by interviewing people and having a support group for people in Southern California, where I learned more and more about alien visitations, ET encounters, military abductions, shamanic paranormal experiences, ritual abuse, cult abuse, you name it. I learned about all kinds of things and decided that there was something unusual happening with respect to what I felt was a love obsession phenomena that appeared to be a kind of manipulation or engineered type of bonding that was going on with some people who had multiple alien visitation experiences in their lives. And so this was something that I actually learned more about through Barbara Bartholic, who was my mentor, who also was a mentor of the late Dr. Carla Turner. And Barbara Bartholic had done some early research with Jacques Vallée, who's a well-esteemed UFO researcher and, PhD in physics. So I learned a lot through her, and also Dr. Carla Turner's work really inspired me to learn more about, I guess, really kind of like the dark side and some of the unusual things that weren't really being reported, at least publicly, in the literature and the genre of the time in terms of like alien abductions and UFO phenomena and that kind of thing. So, make a long story short, I came to learn that many people who had multiple alien abduction histories definitely had their relationships engineered or manipulated or set up in some way, and oftentimes this involved a type of love obsession phenomena. Sometimes they were bonded in childhood as children with their, quote, targeted partners who were also, quote, abductees of certain kinds of aliens. And so they would meet several times throughout their life in these kind of abduction scenarios, or what were remembered sometimes as dreams. but oftentimes these are really a kind of encounter. Sometimes they're physical, sometimes they're what we believe to be astral or like out-of-the-body kind of abduction. So it would play out in life when they would meet later in life as adults, often married to other partners, and it would, be a phenomenal deja vu and just powerful chemistry and a love obsession and a soul connection that was just beyond, understanding. But it was fraught with a lot of drama and, emotional highs, crashing lows, paranormal activity, increased alien abductions, and oftentimes, the relationship wouldn't work out, and it kind of left the people wondering, well, why? Why is this happening? So I learned a lot from Barbara Bartholek, who really said that this was a lot about, she believed it was about a type of emotional energy harvesting and disruption by these beings who are claiming to be aliens or taking the form of different kinds of ETs. And it definitely had a pattern with classic alien abduction and UFO encounter experiences in her research, as well as some of the MILAB reports. So anyway, my first book was in the year 2000. That was specifically about many case histories of what I call the alien love bite. The name of the book is The Love Bite, Alien Interference in Human Love Relationships. So there was many case histories about people who believed that their relationships were definitely set up, pre-bonded, orchestrated, or disrupted by alien beings in particular, with memories of that kind of thing, with both partners either remembering or maybe just one. So sometimes these things are retrieved through hypnotic regressions, although most of my cases, people remembered these things consciously. They didn't necessarily need hypnosis to remember, although sometimes that is helpful. So this wasn't really well received, I would say, in the alien abduction and the contactee Space Brothers circles, and especially the New Age circles, because it was, basically incongruent with a lot of the teachings of some of these New Age psychics and channelers who were telling these people, oh, well, you met your soulmate and your twin flame, and this is a positive spirit guide, and lo and behold, it was really like a shape-shifting reptilian kind of being, or a deceitful type of being that was really playing them like puppets to basically siphon their energy. And so this plays out and has a dynamic that I really probably keyed into in the second book called The Dark Side of Cupid, where I really realized that this is much more of a energy vampirism kind of thing, and it can be recognized with certain symptoms and red flags in terms of what happens if your relationship is being interfered with or set up by some kind of what I call a third-party entity that may be interdimensional, extra-dimensional, or even an ET kind of situation, depending on the being involved. So it was quite a wake-up call for a lot of people because many of my clients, if they hadn't had heard of my previous book or work of Barbara Bartholek, that they may have been, stupefied, bewildered, and grieved in unrequited love for years. So there's some people who were quite devastated by this kind of thing, while others had maybe mild cases. So in both my books, I kind of give a broad overview of the different kinds of cases and the kinds of things that happen. Let's say in the first book, it was more with classic UFO encounters and alien visitations and how they connect with them and pre-bond them and how you could recognize this is definitely an alien thing where the aliens are putting two people together for maybe a number of reasons. And so the second book is more what I'm coming across more often now, where it's not necessarily clear there's, let's say, an alien or an ET situation, although it could be. A lot of times people don't remember or they don't really know their histories. I think most people who've had, let's say, alien visitations, they really don't remember. So I'd say that more people are having them that they really don't remember at all, and they're just seeing, let's say, an outer manifestation of some kind of interference in their life. So I believe now that some of these beings are actually preventing true love, and that if true, let's say, twin flames come together, they work on trying to disrupt the relationship because love is a very powerful thing, and it's also an energy they want to feed off of somehow as a intermediary. It's like, I think some of these beings, they don't have what we have as humans, and they want to parasite us in some way to get that energy. So that's it in a nutshell. And if you want me to go in maybe a different direction, just kind of,
Well, that's a big nutshell, and thank you for sharing that, because it's a big subject, and I was fascinated when I came across your website and I was reading, who you were and what you are doing in the world. I just couldn't help but feeling this giant, yes, this is exactly what we need to understand. This is so important. The New Age industry, absolutely, myself included, I've written about this. The twin flame phenomena, how this kind of love really can be created between two people from a true, authentic heart connection. And then if you are given this information, we have to really understand which one may be the true thing and which one may be the manipulated thing. So I'm really happy we're going to be talking about that tonight, because the last thing, really that would happen if people were just afraid of this kind of, alien ET interference, or didn't understand it, or, whatever, would really not open up their heart to other people in fear that it might be that. So let's start there. How do we tell the difference? We've been spoon-fed and told and talked to, and I myself have actually really come from the heart to write about this topic too. So is it a meme that we're dealing with in the consciousness level, or is it perhaps, that it is true, like Jesus and Magdalene, they said that, these were two people that came together under that same kind of connection and created that great love. How do we know the difference?
Well, that's a very good question. I always found it amazing that, some of the people who were, let's say, hit over the head with a love bite, so to speak, oftentimes what they felt and the kind of connection they felt with that person was a greater love and a greater connection, a more profound, blissful, passionate, telepathic, empathic. I mean, it's so incredible when you feel that with somebody. And then, like, let's say they were married to someone else and they thought that they loved the other person, but then they never felt such a connection in their life until they met this other partner that was pre-bonded to them, like in the love bite. And I believe now that there's there's many dynamics that go into this. I think there's previous karmic connections, which I know is kind of an esoteric way to look at it, but there's also, I think, a kind of manipulation of their energy field or their chakras by the beings, depending on who they are, to put these people together. So it kind of goes into why they might be put together and how they might be doing that. But I still maintain that the connection, once you have that connection, the love is real. There's no doubt that you can have that kind of a connection and really do feel genuine love because you are connected to their soul on that level. The problem is that somebody else seems to be pulling the strings or manipulating, let's say, each other's weaknesses, or a third-party entity is interloping and manipulating behaviors of one partner to basically pit them against each other. So that's the unfortunate part.
So that could be part of, so let me just make sure I understand you. I can hear some questions in the ethers from my audience too. This is a great topic. If you'd like to call in and talk to Eve about a situation that you have, we are open to taking calls tonight. So getting back to my question, we have this happen. The love we create is real. Now, what is your opinion on the intention of ETs or aliens manipulating love relationships or pre-bonding them? Is it to come together and produce that love energy so it can be harvested, or is it more of an infusion into the human consciousness at that point in time? Does it matter how we see aliens, as a good, bad kind of thing versus, neutral and indifferent? How does that change the story?
I mean, I think there's a lot of deception and predation used that's really not in our permission, so to speak, of what they do for their own purposes, regardless of how we feel about it. So they tend to be indifferent to our suffering in order to learn something themselves or get something out of it, like it would be a drug for them. And it depends on the beings, like, if it's alien greys or if it's reptilians or if it's mantis being or if it's another type, sometimes it plays out a little bit differently. So the more blatant ones that have the more severe effects are the ones with what I call the reptoid species that are behind the whole operation. But if I wanted to get back earlier to what you asked and the other questions, like, well, how can you tell if this is like a real relationship or there really is something going on, you know, because we don't want to make excuses, right? We don't want to just think that everything is based on some alien, and that sounds like some kind of paranoid, you know, theory. But there really is what I call red flags if something like this is happening, and how could you identify if that's what it is? So I'll just kind of give you a list of that to make it more clear. And then, because there are some people who, let's say, they're normals, right? Normals in that they're not usual experiencers of paranormal phenomena or have had, let's say, a lifetime of alien visitations. And then there's some people who have one of these, what I call Dark Side of the Cupid relationships, and they're absolutely stunned. Okay, they're stunned and bewildered at the impact and what this relationship is. And so they know it's real because it's happened to them. But if it hasn't happened to you, you might not think this is even real, and it sounds absolutely nuts. But let me just go ahead and read you the red flags, okay? Okay, so one of the red flags is dreams of the partner before meeting them, suggesting something precognitive. Physical sensations in the solar plexus, genital, gut, or other body areas such as neck, heart, and between the shoulders. And there's cases that demonstrate exactly that, because what's going on is actually they're plugging into your energy field, okay, and usually at a certain chakra, like a cord is being placed in there. Astral sex visitations, or what you can be called telesthesia, which is sensing the energy body in a sexual way and very physically but invisibly, as if another being was present. Sometimes having sex or a sensual way, or just telepathic contact. Sometimes the telepathic contact is with the person you think you're connecting with, like the human, right? And then sometimes it's another entity that's a non-human interdimensional type. Okay, you get a strong psychic connection even though you may not really love the partner or they're not your type, so to speak. Powerful sexual passion and obsessive need to have sex and to be with them, even though you may not really love them or they don't love you, or even they might be abusive. But it's like almost an addictive, obsessive, compulsive quality, that connection. Psychic responses and coincidences from either partner, like receiving a phone call or email from your partner the moment you think about cutting off the connection. Synchronicities abound. A sense of emotional or psychic draining, or physical draining even. One partner becoming suddenly switched off emotionally or psychically unplugged. This was actually found out after early cases where, let's say there was an abduction event, after the people were put together and they had this strong connection, and one person was abducted, or both, and then one of them just becomes switched off and unplugged emotionally, like they just don't even have feelings for the person anymore, like that kind of thing. Feelings of being watched or being played like puppets in some kind of drama myth. Paranormal activity, or what I call third-party entity visits or attacks. Sudden dreams, visions, and thoughts as if they're being implanted in you, or even nightmares. Obsessive thoughts that are not usual for either partner. And then the synchronicities, omens, and a feeling of being in a magical reality. That's pretty much the primary symptoms or red flags that something's being interfered with. So that, right there, I think it's really the paranormal activity that's a giveaway. But in the book, in The Dark Side of Cupid, I simplified it as what I call the unholy triad of the Dark Side of Cupid. And that would be three main types of symptoms that would define, if you had two of three of the symptoms, then it would define you probably got one of these Dark Cupid interfered relationships or connections going on. And so in that triad, or the unholy triad, the first one would be the paranormal and supernatural magical types of events that may occur before meeting the partner or during that relationship. And that in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean it's bad or malevolent or anything. But it's the second two, and then the second one would be the emotional highs, crashing lows, or the emotional manipulation factor that makes it feel like it's an unconsummated drama of events out of your control that are just almost too bizarre to happen in normal reality. It's like someone's running the show here. It's like you're in some drama myth that's being played. And then the third element would be, I call the psychopathology element, or like the high emotional manipulation factor, one partner has a high psychopathic kind of behaviors, like a narcissistic personality disorder, or borderline, or what I call the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of thing going on, where they have this hypnotic kind of quality of control, and it usually indicates that they might be overshadowed by another entity that has these kinds of abilities to work through them. Some people may not think so. They think, oh, well, that's just a simple psychopath, and psychopaths can do that. So, but what I found in my book, based on the people that I interviewed, because so many of them were already very intuitive people. They might be energy healers and readers, or psychic and clairvoyant individuals, that many of them were actually able to see and perceive the entity numerous times to know that there was definitely what I call a third-party entity involved in the whole thing, which was really messing things up for people. So that's how you know it's what I call a dark Cupid relationship.
And so if a person experiences a dark Cupid, like you've just gone over and you've given us some excellent signs, you know, where do we draw the line between, stuff we're not taking accountability for, or, perhaps things that we need to, self-reflect on? And when is it us versus them? I mean, where do we draw the line between taking responsibility for our own healing processes through relationships, and then, also having something else orchestrated interference? Because I can see people using that as kind of an excuse not to own their stuff. You know what I mean? Well, this is my stuff and I'm sabotaging this relationship, but I'm going to blame it on a third-party entity or an ET and blame you and run away in the other direction. Where do we stop?
Yeah, I know. That's probably one of the big, complaints or arguments that people would bring up, but in reality, definitely take responsibility for what I call blind spots. And basically 1/3 of the book, The Dark Side of Cupid, is about psychological understanding of emotional vampirism and psychic vampirism and intervention strategies of just good, plain and simple communication issues and abilities, as well as paranormal intervention strategies if something really is interfering. But definitely both people need to take in consideration their own, let's say, their own baggage, their emotional baggage, and to be willing to heal and to communicate in such a way that you communicate compassionately and honestly, and in a way that understands the gender differences. And then actually I go into that in terms of, the basic gender differences of how we respond in perceptions and our response to stress, for example. So the John Gray books are excellent for regular relationship issues and how to deal with our own shadow and communication and connection, so that we know how to make the best of the relationship, knowing these things, and that is definitely useful. But in the paranormal stuff, it's actually our responsibility to clear out if there is an entity. Sometimes these happen innocuously. I mean, sometimes just because you're born in a certain family where there's what I call the family curse, or a bloodline curse, or a familiar spirit that's basically passed on genetically even, and that basically it's the person's responsibility to do their clearing and their healing work with what they can do, and just be honest and humble about it, really, to take that responsibility. And so I definitely suggest that's important, because more often than not, both people have a little something. Sometimes one person has a little more than the other. So it really takes both parties being willing to be honest and communicate, what their awareness is of the situation and to deal with it. And really, therein lie a lot of the problems, was the unwillingness of one party, usually, to deal with it or to recognize that there was anything going on, because their perception was their awareness was so limited, or they were in denial of their own blank spots, what I call their blind spots, or they had addictions or whatever. So really it takes healing and clearing and being willing to deal with this. So I believe that if there is a really good connection, and people believe there really is, let's say, a twin flame thing going on, then it's up to them to take responsibility on both ends to do their own healing and clearing on all levels, so they could maintain and nurture that love for their benefit, because it's very powerful and wonderful. So it takes a kind of humility and willingness to learn how to communicate and understand the basic gender differences, so we learn how to work with one another, but also take the paranormal strategies, which would be certain kinds of healing and clearing, which I only really have started to do myself in my own work and research. So there's many different ways you can do this depending on what the problem is. So really, one of the red flags also is, or a vulnerability would be trauma. If there's a lot of trauma in someone's life, especially early trauma, that could contribute to not only the blind spots, but the shadow self, right? But with trauma, sometimes entities will actually enter into the reality through trauma. So the traumas of alien abductions and the traumas of sexual abuse, the traumas of being in a mind control project, or the traumas of just being a child of an alcoholic parent where there was abuse, or any number of things. So you have to learn about all the different areas of how these interdimensional forces and entities can enter into our reality, and then how to clear that so they're no longer a problem. So, but
isn't it interesting?
Work,
yeah, I have a question for you at this point. If I would think, and I feel when I look at this intuitively, that, as we heal, as we do just what you just said, we become more aware of the manipulation and those that seem to be participating in it. Don't you think once we become clear and honest with ourselves and go through our processing and, claim our own stuff, we actually free ourselves from their ability to be able to manipulate the relationships through a closed down consciousness? Would you say that's fair to say?
Oh, totally. I mean, the biggest compromising factor of being, let's say, a victim would be lack of awareness. That's number one. But also unhealed wounds, blind spots from unhealed wounds, and then unwillingness to even do the healing work. And then sometimes there are people who actually take on entities or take on what I call, demons, to be honest with you. Some people who engage in that, in certain kinds of magic and sorcery and black magic, where in 2 cases in my book, at least 2 cases, one of the partners was well aware of who and what they were and what power they were using. And this was not some mistaken thing. They were basically full-on possessed people or partially possessed and knew it and used it for the power. So it depends on the situation, but the more aware you are, the more resilient you can become, and the more sensitive you become to the nuances of how this manipulation happens. And, you could see it in classic emotional vampirism, for example, and how to not engage when that's happening, and how to, set appropriate boundaries and not get hooked in when you start to see that dynamic happening and certain patterns, and you learn how to not basically take the bait or hook, and you basically close off all those doorways until you're not an easy target anymore. But it takes time, because what I notice is not just a matter of, let's say, being weak or being unaware, or you're a victim of abuse or abductions. There are people that I've met, several, even in the book, who were, let's say, normals, who didn't have that kind of a life, right? But once they did research in alternative, let's say, conspiracy topics, spirituality, these kinds of things, where it's like the truth, speaking the truth, and uncovering some dark secrets, then they were actually targeted by one of these Dark Side of Cupid relationships, and never had that before in their life, and they were like one after the other because they were actually targets. So this was a disruption process. So this is something that I also talk about in the book, as it's not necessarily just our own wounds, but that plays a part in our vulnerability. But there's some people who are literally targeted. So, and this is I say it's a malevolent force that's trying to prevent not only information of the truth, but also trying to disrupt the power of true love, because true love is very, very powerful,
I agree 100%. So, I often think about the world today, and I look at the headlines, and sometimes I write about them and sometimes I don't. And I see a world that is forming a really interesting eddies of energy around the planet. And if we infused a higher kind of consciousness, a higher kind of love, if we started to have very empowered relationships with each other in all senses, whether it's partnership or a brother-sister or, mother-child, any form of relationship, if that was all strengthened and our bloodline curses were cleared, we would have a tremendous difference, I think, form in the world around us. We would see that reflected back to us. And I agree with that 100%. I've often said it. I've written about it. And many people have expressed the same in return. It's something in the consciousness that people are remembering. And I often ask, if Jesus and Magdalene were brought back, back to life here in modern day time, 2014, would they even be able to create the kind of bond and love that they, that is said to have happened between them two? What are your thoughts on that? What would happen if this planet changed?
They'd be totally attacked like they were even then. Even in the Gnostic tractates of the Nag Hammadi library, it's clear that some of how they describe these predators, they call them archons or archontic mind parasites, are really similar to what we're really observing, although we're seeing it as different kinds of ETs or interdimensional beings, but it's really the same kind of dynamic going on, which I think people in the Gnostic circles, or even the early followers of Jesus, if that was even his name, by the way, but I think his name might have been something else. But I think there were people who were definitely aware of the game plan. And actually in the tractates of the Nag Hammadi, I don't know which one, but they called the archons the rulers because they knew that there were certain rulers over the planet in these other realms that were actually manipulating, like, religion big time, right? So, and that's probably what part of Jesus' work was before it got completely co-opted and corrupted by, the Catholic Church, and what it is now is probably nothing what it was when, he was alive. So I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think that's changing as the truth movement, we've had a truth movement move through this world over the last several years. We've had an alternative media movement move through this world. We've had a lot of things interject into the consciousness of humanity that's of a higher caliber. And as we move up, evolve, whatever you want to call it, we have an opportunity to make choices and be more lucid in those choices, I believe. So is it perhaps that these beings are evolving with us, or is it something that they're trying, or are we like a herd of cattle where, we're fed grass and kept in a nice corral and, given a ho-hum life, and then we're, taken care of to feed them in the end, and just a big indifference type thing?
Well, that's a good question. There's a lot of discussion, in the exopolitics movement of, which kinds of ETs or star beings, or where are they from? Are they good? Are they bad? How do they interact with us? What's their agenda? And even in the Milab and Super Soldier accounts, where they're actually working off-planet to defend against territories and defend against certain alien species, they know that there's competing alliances not only with different human intelligence and security groups, but alien groups. So it gets like, my sense is, okay, how do we determine, what are the intentions and capabilities and integrity of a particular being? And it really boils down to learning how to sense their energy and sense their soul and their behaviors. And by their deeds you shall know them, but sometimes you can't wait that long to discover what they are, because some beings are extremely deceptive by nature. They are deceivers and predatory by nature. And so you can't necessarily attribute human logic to a being that is only of that essence. It would be like, basically the understanding of psychopaths is a very good study when we want to understand some of these aliens that are basically predatory and basically narcissistic in terms of they just do what they want and take what they want and deceive and manipulate just to do whatever they want, So I'm not saying all of them are like that, but it really boils down to your own discernment and learning how to discern energy and intention of a being. And not only, like what's going on in your own body, learning how to discern, let's say if your energy field is being affected by someone, you just build your discernment and your sensitivity through like meditation and different practices, and you start learning how to discern energies, and that's really the only way.
Well, we have to understand it one way or the other, and, experience gives us a prime time teaching experience. When we talk about paranormal activity associated with this kind of intervention, what makes it different from other kinds of paranormal activity? Are there specifics we should look for?
Well, I suppose, like paranormal activity, you usually think of, a haunted house or a poltergeistic activity or seeing a ghost or a shadow person or things flying across the room. That's usually what people think of. But in terms of paranormal activity, the things that are usually experienced with, let's say, the Dark Side of Cupid would be when you have astral visitations with the person, or you're taken out of the body, and whereas you never had before, or you suddenly have precognitive abilities where you didn't have them before, just when you got involved in this relationship kind of thing. So you'll have precognitive things. You may have spontaneous remote viewing images in your mind of the partner, or those abilities just pop up, that kind of thing. And then you may have, of course, ghostly visits where, you get the cold chill and there's a presence in the house, or, like in my book, after somebody, let's say, meets with somebody, or they may have intimacy with them, then like there on after they keep getting these like weird entity attacks, and that would be like strange paranormal activity where you're basically being visited by an entity that's actually connected to the partner they just were with. So things like that. You can get the phone problems and your light bulbs blowing out and that kind of thing too.
Yeah, and that's on your one article that's actually posted on the Achieve Radio homepage. If anybody's interested in reading it, it's fantastic. You at one point mentioned in there the unholy trinity. And one of the things that you did mention already in the show, but I want to go back to quickly, is that the number one thing, which was paranormal activity, these kinds of happenings, it was this number 2 and number 3 that we should really be looking for if we're trying to decide, because that paranormal activity does happen between twin flames. So if we have a kind of high and low crashes, if we feel like our emotions are being manipulated, I mean, it's a real fine line, I think, between, getting spooked by the paranormal activity. I can see people running off and saying, oh my gosh, it's an alien. And if, or it could really be your twin flame, and this kind of phenomenon is definitely producible. So
it's amazing, though. I mean, there's so many things that could happen when you have, let's say, when you have a powerful connection with someone. It's as if it activates your heart fire chakras. You could say it activates your kundalini sometimes. And even with that kind of energetic activation, you can have spontaneous psychic abilities, telepathic connections, seeing auras, just as a result of your energy field being activated. So a lot of that could be just the simple connection itself. So a lot of times when you meet the person, it actually may spontaneously cause you to actually remember, let's say, a past life connection that you've had with them before. Sometimes that happens, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's being manipulated. It just means you may have a spontaneous memory because that soul connection is strong. So we can assume from that point forward that this is not something for us to be afraid of. This is something for us to embrace and explore and allow it to feel. But we should be paying attention to warning signs or red flags, so to speak. Correct? Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who really, searching for their soulmate. They really want to believe it's their twin flame, but to exercise caution if they're having, let's say, the energy drain, or they feel like there's a cord, going from their solar plexus to some other entity, or let's say if they're having these fantastic experiences where they feel a connection with someone. I get this report a lot where they feel a fantastic connection with another person they know in the world, and they may have phenomenal dreams or even astral visitations that are just like this blissful melding of souls kind of thing. Or they may experience some of the synchronicities, but the other person, if they ask the other person, they can be bold enough to ask, is the other person experiencing this too? Sometimes the other person just like, well, no, that's not happening to me. So that's a red flag to me that, okay, it could be being manipulated, or the other person's like so unaware that they're going to shut down, and you're not going to be able to have a relationship with them because they're going to run away, basically. So some people call that the twin flame runner thing, but really, if it was a true twin flame, they're going to be on the level with each other. They're going to be mutual in their emotional and spiritual and intellectual and physical connection. More likely, they're going to be much more compatible. It's not going to be this crazy stuff.
So it's a reciprocal relationship. It's you love me, I love you. We're both feeling the same thing. And that's more, I mean, everybody out there listening, if you're feeling this, ask the other person if they're feeling it too. Really important, because then it gets all creepy and weird. Yeah. You mentioned something about not being able to consummate the love. And I want to talk about that. When we're unable to consummate the love, what does that mean?
You know, that seems to be I think that's a strategy of the buildup of energy and tension, which can create a tremendous amount of, love energy, sexual energy, emotional energy. And, it depends on how far the people, are willing to go to, if they really want that relationship, how far they're willing to go to be able to, get together or consummate it. It seems to me that it's just like a game these beings play where they just throw all these obstacles in your way, so it's just like this horrible unrequited thing. Or they'll switch off one partner where they had this really strong mutual connection, and then they just switch off one partner where the other one experiences like a crashing low that is just horribly devastating after they've been completely opened up energetically. And a lot of times they don't lose that psychic connection with the person. Even after the other one shuts down, they're still feeling like totally connected with them. So
that's the tragedy. That's that part of, that's obviously part of the manipulation, because the true twin flames would agree and commit to working together to harbor that love as sacred and moving forward in a way that is much different than the cutoff. So the cutoff, would the cutoff be then fair to say one of the big red flags, really? I mean, the cutoff is,
yes, I mean, I think the switching off, like this is something that I discovered through, if I investigated more fully with people who had enough conscious awareness and memory of their experience and their history, sometimes you can trace back that switching off to what I call an alien abduction or visitation, or even an astral abduction, where they take them and they basically cut the psychic cords and, reattach them to somebody else or something like that on the ship. And I've had several people report that kind of thing to me, where they were able to make the connection between, I was switched off and then I don't feel anything now because after the abduction they did something and now it's just like I don't feel anything, Or the person switched off after they had an abduction in the camping trip and they just didn't remember, or they still had too much PTSD and so they just shut off. So that kind of thing, you could trace it back,
Yeah, tricky stuff. It's tricky stuff. Now, many my listeners and people in the world are becoming more and more aware of the military technology, also the military abductions, things that have been relatively, taken as truth with as much research and stuff that is out there. Is this something that could perhaps be military-wise, technology-related, where, it's coming through different types of technology instead of ETs?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that happens too. It seems to me that in what I call the MILAB cases, which are people who've had not only alien abductions in their life, but also military, or in their encounters, they're basically MK Ultra with alien connections. And sometimes the aliens train them, or they have alien handlers, or the military working with the aliens together. And then those people may have a more profound love bite thing where they're actually set up with somebody who acts as their handler sometimes, or acts to kind of control them or to keep them from awakening and breaking their programming and becoming fully aware and healed. So that definitely happens, and I do believe there's a technology, but I don't think it explains it all. I mean, even people who do sorcery and magic spells, that could have a similar effect. So
So something has learned how to manipulate energy in whatever way, through whatever form, whether it's aliens, the military, the government, or people who know how to do it. It's something that is very real, and it's affecting relationships. And, I can see why, because, again, we go back to the power of this profound love that it creates. It creates a mirror for other people. When they see that, they see a living example. They get the emanations that are coming off of that couple. They feel that. They're inspired by it. They have spontaneous healings from witnessing something like that.
Totally.
So, it's a really big threat to a controlling, oppressive energy that holds on this planet.
Yeah, I see it as, if there are dark forces that want to keep us enslaved, they'll do anything they can to prevent true love and create religions and belief systems and all manner of conditioning to create all these gender issues so that never happens. And so when it comes close to happening, when, you really are meeting somebody who's like powerfully connected, twin flame soulmate thing, a lot of times there are forces to disrupt it, especially if those people are doing great good in the world, where they're, exposing the darkness and inspiring and healing people. So, I know that happens.
So what do we do? What's the solution to becoming aware of this information and then sitting back? People should perhaps, do you think, reflect on their relationships that they've had with these kinds of potential people? And if it has fallen apart in a horrible way, or, the cutoff happened, or do they go back and try to heal that? Do they heal it with themselves? Do they move on and do better next time? Where do we go once we become so aware of this information and what's actually happening?
Well, sometimes it's a lone journey when you come to a greater level of awareness, because, get to the point where, do you want to be with someone who you know is just going to be constantly manipulated to be a thorn on your side, or will it be a mutual? Like, if you want something of equality and mutuality, you want someone who's on your same level of awareness and functioning. So sometimes it's challenging, but, doing your own healing work is good. And also recognizing that, you could be manipulated too, and to have compassion for people when they're in their vulnerable places, to try to be a presence, or what I call creating the space, so that if there is healing that needs to be done, that you could be a catalyst for their healing and to help them in that process. And then they become stronger and more aware once they deal with their blind spots and maybe change certain behaviors that were more easily manipulated before. Mm-hmm. So we really have to help heal one another, It's, but I think women are on the lead in that department, to be honest with you, that men need to step up to the plate in terms of their willingness to be aware and to expand their awareness on that level, that dynamic. And not to assume that they don't need help and there's nothing wrong with them when they're a frigging, abuser or an alcoholic who's just like miserable to be around. You know what I mean? There's a lot of, you just have to be humble and willing to explore and know how to communicate and just make healing and recovery and clearing your life, because that's the best thing to do, because that is very empowering.
So what do we do once we realize that maybe we've been duped into this kind of alien type manipulated matchmaking service, and we realize what's going on, and we are not in doubt anymore? We've moved beyond that, and we're listening to the show going, yes, that's happened to me. Yes, yeah, oh yeah. And we've really agreed that this is it. What do we do how do we stop it? How do we transform it? How do we change it? What do we do when we actually feel that somebody is in our life in that position, being controlled by an entity as such?
And, I think, it doesn't help to be judgmental or critical or blaming. And I think that we have to come to a place of where, if we really want to communicate with someone, how could we communicate in a way that's compassionate, but also setting appropriate boundaries and being effective in, like, let's say, compassionate communication. And that is a challenge, because some people are very stubborn. So really, it's learning how to communicate with them, so that just kind of maybe putting out some testers just to see where they're at with like, I think something else is going on, and you just try to communicate so that they can remain open to you if they do come back and realize later. Sometimes it takes them a while to wake up. Sometimes they never do. But I'd say don't spin in your anger and your blame or your condemnation of someone, because that doesn't work. It's just, you just stand firm in the truth of what you know is to be true, and to apply compassion and also tough love and wisdom in all your dealings with people, so that, some people you can talk to, some people you can't.
And then we move on. We really have to understand ourselves well enough to know when something's not working, and we have to trust that. And there is, just like there is entities doing this, there is angels and divine orchestration as well. And, when we make peace with our bloodline, our ancestors are always accessible to us. We have to discern the difference, don't you think, between, our angelic team and the other team that's working the opposite side of the field.
Yeah, and that's a big issue for so many people, because sometimes it's hard to tell, or they get like a interference pattern where you get the signal to noise ratio is not clearly defined enough because there's so much interference. It's like just having a staticky radio signal, There's a lot of crap out there, so the best thing is to get in touch with your own heart and your own soul and your, quote, spirit, and be so clear and firm with that connection to yourself, which is connected to the all, like your divine connection. Then once you get that connection, you're more able to discern all the rest. So really it's like connecting to self and to source, and then all else, basically can be more easily discerned. So I think so many of us have been conditioned to seek a God outside of ourselves, or to seek a spirit guide or this angel, and then we forget that, it's really within us if we are clear enough in that connection and listening to that core instead of, let's say, the programs we're told to believe, which this world is so upside down, it's hard to know, right? So staying really clear in your heart and your soul and your core, and being willing to heal the wounds that could make us trigger or to have projections which are not accurate. So
it's a tricky thing, but it can be done. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, we create space for each other, and as long as we become aware and we start sharing openly in a non-threatening environment where we understand we all have our weaknesses. We all can fuck up sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, I want to remind people. Exactly. And I want to remind people that it's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's let those things evolve naturally. And if you start to feel that kind of interference happening, take your partner aside and address it. Talk to them about it, clear the field, really, really be honest and open. Don't jump to conclusions or assumptions or get lost in your stuff, because I believe that's how it works. Your cracks are filled with something else instead of self-love.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times it's more complex. Sometimes we think it's all the person's other fault, like the other person's fault, but sometimes it's our own, and it's a combination of our unhealed wounds and what attachments or beliefs we have combined with theirs that creates like a bigger problem. Mm-hmm. So it's almost as if some of these entities, like reptilians in particular, they actually have their own networking system on a other dimensional level that could network with one another and actually put people together who are prime candidates for these machinations, these orchestrations. And that's what I've come to learn. It's like once you open up your awareness, you start to see there's actually a network going on. And so you basically want to get out of their network.
Well, we're out of time, and unfortunately we could keep talking. But if you are interested in more information, please go to her website, Eve Lorgen. Am I saying that correctly, Lorgen?
Oh, Lorgen, yes.
Lorgen.
Eve Lorgen.
Excuse me. EveLorgen.com, Lorgen. Eve has spilled the knowledge tonight, so what we do with it now is up to us. Eve, thank you so much for being here. How can people have consultations with you? Can they schedule? Okay. And how's the best way for them to get in touch with you to do that?
The best way to get in touch is really just to go through the web message contact form that's on my website under the contact menu button on the EveLorgen.com site. I'm also on Facebook if you want to contact me there through a message. And then if you want to schedule a session, there's a place on the website where you can schedule one or just contact me and we could work it out. So
So,
it's pretty
excellent.
easy.
Thank you so much. And everybody, thank you so much for joining me tonight, listening to this fantastic information. And I'm sure it will leave lots to think about. Happy holidays, everyone. And remember acts of kindness. Be nice to yourself and be nice to others. It's that time of year. Good night, everybody. Namaste.
Right. Thank you.